Good morning, friends. I'm Deepak Kannal, the ex-dean of Faculty of Fine Arts, MS University of Baroda. In the 18th module of the paper on aesthetics and philosophy for the PG course in visual arts, we are planning to discuss two scholars who were not considered to be very important until the medieval times. Though their period goes back to 1st century BC AD, their names were not known, or at least they were not considered to be very important till 15th, 16th century. One of them goes back to 1st century BC. His name is Horace, and his work is known as Ars Poetica, the art of poetics. The other scholar, there is a slight confusion about the date of the other scholar. His name is Longinus, or sometimes he is also called Longinus by some of the scholars. And some people believed that he was the minister of Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. And since Zenobia lived in 3rd century, he too is placed in 3rd century AD. But there is also an opinion that he could go back to 1st century AD. But even if he is in 1st century AD, it means that after Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, that is after 4th century BC, nothing very significant has been said or written till 1st century AD. There is a hiatus of a few hundred years, and surprisingly there is even a larger hiatus after Horace and Longinus. That is why Horace and Longinus are like two islands in the void, which are obviously call for a serious attention. Unfortunately, Horace doesn't say anything drastically different than the things which have been already said by Plato and Aristotle. Rather, he has been criticized for his mediocrity by so many scholars at a later date. We'll talk about it later. But at the same time, his contribution cannot be totally overlooked. He has contributed something which can be compared to the Lakshana Granthas, which we talked about while talking about Indian aesthetics. If you try to recollect the 12th century Shilpa Shastras in India, Horace's Ars Poetica is very similar to the Shilpa Shastras. It is almost like a guidebook or a handbook for the young artists. He gives instructions to the young artist. He tries to tell them the role of a critic. So he's almost a guiding critique for the budding artist, and he's playing that role with all seriousness. So obviously, a person who is trying to guide the young artist may not have anything very original to say, but let's see what he has to say, and then we'll try to evaluate him. I think in the process of intellectual debate, every scholar has his own contribution, and though Horace is never taken seriously by the modern scholars, I think he too has a significant contribution to Western aesthetic thought, though not original. He has commented on mimesis, and because he is an ardent follower of Plato's thought, and while talking about mimesis, he has tried to give a slightly different interpretation of the theory of mimesis. Unlike Plato, though he has great regards for Plato, unlike Plato, he does not have a disregard for the artist community. And that is why his interpretation of mimesis becomes a little softer than Plato's understanding of mimesis. He says that the artist does not imitate the objects in the life, he imitates the life. The imitation is not of the objects. The kind of mindless imitation which Plato has in mind when Plato says that artist is a hapless imitator, he is talking about some mindless imitation. Horace is trying to say that what artist imitates is not the objects of the life, but the life itself. Now this also reminds me of Bharata's Natyam Bhavanukirtanam. He is imitating the emotions of life. He is imitating the behavior of the people. He is imitating the events from the real life. And that is why it should not be treated as and less activity, according to Horace. The other interpretation is, he says, following the great models. There are two types of imitations. In first place, he says that the artist may imitate the life. The artist may imitate the events from the life, may imitate the behavior of people, may imitate the emotions of the people. And the other imitation, now this is altogether a different interpretation of the term imitation, where he says imitating the great masters. Now this is, if you really want to be a great artist, he said that you should have great models in front of you and you should try to imitate them, not exactly imitate, but follow them as models. Try to imbibe the qualities which you see in those great authors or great artists and try to imbibe those qualities in your writing. This kind of imitation is different, and a similar expectation, a similar guideline is found in Chinese 6 principles also. If you remember our discussion on Shadanga, and we compared the Shadangas with the 6 principles of CAO, and in CAO's 6 principles, he also talks about the copies of old masters. One of the exercises which is very important to create great art is imitating the great masters. In Chinese tradition, it is considered to be a great exercise. And I don't know whether you people have seen Chinese art before, have studied Chinese art. Some of the great masters have been imitated for 500 years, for 1000 years. And some of the works which are available to us of these great masters are the copies, the original works are lost. So this is also very interesting that he is interpreting imitation altogether in a different manner. This is a different understanding of the term mimesis. In a way, if you see the neoclassical art, I'm sure all of you have studied neoclassical art in your college days, and we know that in neoclassical period, the Greco-Roman principles were being revived. Or in India, if we go back to the early 20th century, in the Bengal school, we were trying to revive the Indian principles. He is exactly trying to advise the young artists to do that. Trying to revive the values, trying to revive the elements from the older masters. Neoclassical art seems to have a very marked influence of Horace on it. We don't know whether Horace, but they certainly followed Horace's principles in their art, because they were trying to imitate the models of Greco-Roman times. If you see Canova, if you see Ingres, the other neoclassical masters like David, you will realize they are following the principles of Greco-Roman art in their expression. Now this is what Horace is prescribing, and the neoclassical artists have faithfully followed it. So it seems that though not directly, but indirectly, Horace has impressed some generation of artists. We do not know whether they directly took it from Horace or they were inspired to do it on their own. He also talks about the notion called propriety, which can be translated as auchitya in Sanskrit. In the earlier sessions when we were discussing Indian aesthetics, we talked about Kshemendra. And I said that Kshemendra considers propriety as the only guna in a work of art. Propriety, like showing things in the right light. He has given some interesting example. He says that if an artist wants to do something original, if the artist wants to do something which has not been done in the earlier times, it doesn't mean that he should keep aside propriety. If an artist tries to show a dolphin in the jungle, or if he tries to show a wild boar in the waters, probably it's not an expression of originality, it is an expression of stupidity, because he is keeping his common sense eye. This propriety is very, very important. So only originality doesn't make great art. It has to have a sense of propriety in it. So he has many such observations. He is almost like a teacher. I think if you read, it's a very small text, a few lines perhaps. So if you read that text, you will realize that he's almost like an old teacher who is trying to give instructions to his young students. He's not an aesthete in the real sense. He doesn't claim to have proposed a new theory, discovered a new theory, or questioned an earlier theory. It is a person who is trying to water down the existing theories for the consumption of his students. He's almost like a mediator who is trying to understand the theories of Plato and Aristotle and is making them palatable to his students. He's doing the job of a teacher. He is doing the job of a senior critic, a guiding critic, nothing more than that. And he doesn't claim to be a great scholar. So Horace modestly has contributed to Western art to a great extent. He has also talked about the merits and demerits, which remind you of the notion of guna and dosha in Indian aesthetics. So what are the merits of a good work of art? What are the merits? What are the demerits of a good work of art? All these things have been discussed in Ars Poetica. But obviously, because it did not propose any significant theory, any original theory, he was severely criticized by the modern scholars. And George Saintsbury, a 20th century scholar, has described Ars Poetica, that text, as le mediocritate. That is a mediocre text, a text which does not have. So there are two different opinions about Horace. There are a few who appreciate his efforts, but most of them do not consider Horace as a very important scholar. The other scholar, who was not considered important till recently, became very important in the Romantic period, and that is Longinus. Longinus's text is known as Perihaphsos. Now it's very difficult to translate Perihaphsos. It can be broadly translated as on elevation of style, or on the excellence of expression, or on literary excellence, something like that. It is a treatise which is written on the literary excellence or elevation of style in particular. Now, as I told you earlier also, that Longinus is basically a rhetorist. Rhetorists are the people. Do you remember what we talked about rhetorics earlier? Rhetorics was a very important art in Greece earlier, because in those days there is a beautiful scene in one of the plays based on Julius Caesar's life. You know that Julius Caesar, the great emperor of Rome, was murdered, and then after his murder, one of his supporters, Mark Antony, he actually there was almost a mutiny against Julius Caesar, and which was being led by Brutus. Now Brutus would have taken over Caesar's kingdom by that time, but Mark Antony gave a long speech, and that speech was so effective that all the people who were supporting Brutus, they changed their mind and they supported Antony and killed Brutus. Now only a speech can make this difference. The politicians can turn the tides just using their words, using their tongues. Now this art of speaking, which is very necessary for the good governance and politics, was regarded as a necessity for any leader in Greco-Roman culture. So rhetorics was considered to be a great art, and there were people who taught that art to people. This man, Longinus, was basically a rhetorist, and that is why some of the scholars who have written about his theory today are raising the doubt that whether the way we have been interpreting the theory of Longinus today, did he really mean that, or we are misinterpreting that theory? We are unnecessarily lionizing that theory. But we will talk about it at a later juncture when we discuss Sublime once again in the context of Romantic painting in 19th century. We will have to discuss Romantic painting again, because at that juncture this theory becomes a very, very important theory. It gets inflated to a great scale, but that comes later. Before that, we will try to understand what Longinus was trying to say in his own times. In 16th and 17th century, the translations of this text were published in Italian and English language, and then they were translated in other European languages. So what exactly did he mean by sublime? If you translate it Literally, sublime means something that is transporting, something that is moving, something that is shaking you. Now, as we know that he was a rhetorist, naturally he was trying to speak about a speech which can move people, which can really inspire people. Transporting is the word. Now we use the word transporting for a different. We call it transport, but transporting is pushing somebody, shifting somebody. So that speech should be so powerful that it should transport people emotionally from one place to another place. It should excite people. It should move people. It should inspire people for an action. So that was the meaning which he had in mind. And he said that there are 5 elements which are necessary for this kind of an expression. The first one is the great thought, obviously, the genius. No great speech, no great expression is possible without a great thought. It has to have an important thought. Otherwise, I remember, just to explain this phenomena, I am giving a very simple illustration. In our Department of Applied Arts, the head of the department, who was a very well-known scholar and artist, D.G. Godse, he used to pose a question to all his students, first-year students, on the very first day, that to do good business, to sell a product, what is most necessary? And obviously, all the students who sought admission in applied arts, who sought admission in commercial art, they very enthusiastically replied, good advertisement. To sell an object, what you need is good advertisement. He always used to laugh at it, and he used to say, no, the first requirement is good product. If the product is not good, however hard you try to advertise it, you are not going to sell it. You might sell it for a short while, but then it would fail. The same is true about it, that the style, while talking about the style, however impressive the style might be, if it doesn't have the content, if it doesn't have the core in it, then it will be exposed at some juncture or the other. So the genius or the thought, the great thought, is the first requisite of any great expression, according to Longinus. Then the second one is spontaneity and intensity. When you express, particularly in rhetorics, intensity is very, very important. If you read out a thing lifelessly, I should not be taking names, but we know that there are some politicians who sometimes make a very meaningful speech, but in a very uninspiring voice. They read out their contents in such a voice that even if they are talking something important, people don't take cognizance of it. And some of the politicians can very vehemently, in a very intense manner, impart the content and people to them very well. Now, you have several examples of this sort. So, the intensity and spontaneity is a very important factor of the art of rhetorics. It may not be necessarily a quality of other arts. Like spontaneity may not be a quality of poetry. Sometimes it might be, sometimes it may not be. Intensity, sometimes a work of art may not be intense. It can be very, very contemplative. And still it can be very good. You know what contemplative is. Where it is very introvert, where it is very restrained. Even a restrained expression can be very, very effective. So this quality is applicable only to rhetorics and perhaps not to other arts. The third quality he is talking about is embellishment, which is understandable, that if you want to make your expression palatable. Now, in Indian aesthetics also we saw that however beautiful your poetry might be, it needs to be embellished, it needs to be decorated with some alankaras. We talked about alankara theory. So that embellishment is also a necessity of any expression, and he talks about embellishment also. Of course, embellishment again has its own limitations. Even without embellishment, a work of art or a speech can be extremely expressive, extremely effective. But he gives importance to embellishment also. Then the fourth one is appropriate expression, which is very important. The expression, now this style, this speaks about the style. Appropriate expression. How do you say it? What do you say is important, but how do you express it is even more important. Many a times the content gets lost if it is not appropriately expressed. So appropriate expression is also very important for sublime expression. And the fifth one, there are five qualities which he has talked about, and the fifth one is skillful structure. So it should be very skillfully structured. Now, after, fine, even skillful structure is very important. Now, after reading these five elements, do you really think that this can be very effective? But does a great work of art need all these five qualities, or if we try to read it vice versa, could these five qualities make a good work of art? Perhaps these qualities are not enough to make a good work of art, and that is why some of the modern scholars are raising doubt whether Periapsus really wanted to talk about the things which we are trying to impose on it today. Because sublime, as we are understanding it, is something very, very different. If you see the interpretation of sublime in the Romantic period, they are trying to look at sublime from a different point of view. The example, the proper example in Indian context could be the example of Vishwarupa Darshan. All of you have heard about Bhagavad Gita. In the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna starts Krishna's advices, because when Krishna advises on several things, though Krishna is his cousin and friend, Arjuna is not aware that Krishna is the Lord himself. He is the incarnation of the Lord himself. So Arjuna at some juncture asks him that you are telling all these things so confidently to me, as if you are the person who has made everything. The Lord says that yes, I am the person who has made it. And then Arjuna laughs over there. He obviously, if somebody tells you that I am God, I am the God, obviously if your friend tells you that she is the goddess, you would laugh at her. Arjuna also laughed at her. And there Krishna appeared in front of him in his Vishwarupa. You know this. And when he appeared in that Vishwarupa, try to imagine that experience. This is transporting. The word transporting, which is used in sublime all the time, what will happen to you? You will really get swayed away. And that is also a frightening experience. Actually, in sublime, particularly in the interpretation of sublime in Romantic period, this particular element has been discussed, that there is an element of fear in great beauty. When you get the experience of beauty in its fullest charm, it almost frightens you. I'm sure since you people are staying in the northern part of the country, you must have visited Himalayas. If you go to Himalayas don't please you, they frighten you. The moment you enter into the last range of Himalayas, it's a shaking experience. It shocks you. It frightens you. Even the description which you find in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita can be applied to this experience also. It says, Sidanti mama gatrani mukham cha parishushate. My limbs are trembling and my tongue is drying up. When Arjuna, while talking about his state in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, he says, Sidanti mama gatrani mukham cha parishushate. A great experience of art or a great experience of beauty can literally shake you. There you get a little helpless. I don't know whether you have come across any work of art of that sort, but sometimes a great play, a great film can give you that experience to you. In visual arts, that kind of experience is not very common. But I'm sure some of you must have seen the painting called Raft of Medusa. Have you seen this painting? When I saw Raft of Medusa in original for the first time, I literally got a similar experience. It's a huge painting, and all those people they are struggling for life, and some of them are already dead. Some are on the verge of death. The other people are with all their strength and might. They are trying to struggle against that offers a similar experience to you. You cannot look at that painting for a very long time. Or if you see Munch's paintings, I had an opportunity to see a retrospective of Munch, and that was also a very moving experience. One could not see the whole exhibition in a single go. It was really overpowering you. It was really troubling you. It was transporting you. So visual arts also can offer that kind of experience to you, but in film, it is more possible, or in theatre it is more possible. If you see a Shakespearean play or a film based on Shakespearean play, I don't know whether you have seen a film like Onkara or some of the films, not exactly Shakespearean, but a film like Junoon. Now, seeing that film or a film like Turtles Can Fly, if you see that film, when you go home, you are a different person. People say that if you read a novel like War and Peace, you become a different person after reading War and Peace. Before reading War and Peace, you are a different person, and after reading War and Peace, you are a different person. There are some novels by Hemingway. After reading that novel, you enter into a different state of mind. Now, these experiences are sublime experiences, and a work of art has a capacity to offer this kind of experience to you. But it cannot be translated so easily. It is not possible to trace the reasons behind that expression so easily and make it into a formula. The problem with Preface and Longinus, he has tried to find the reasons, find the formula of sublimity, 5 simple statements. I think Sublime is a very complex experience. It is called resurrection of wonder, where the element of wonder is born in your mind. So we will talk about Sublime once again in the context of romantic painting, and we will also take into consideration the various interpretations of Sublime offered by the later scholars, by the 20th century scholars. So these are 2 important scholars from 1st to 3rd century, and then again there is a big hiatus of about 1000 years. For 1000 years we do not know anything about Western aesthetics. Yesterday one of you were asking me that why there is such a big hiatus. The reasons could be many. One of the reasons is perhaps because of the great turmoil and the rise of Christianity, the aesthetic understanding was radically changing actually. So we'll talk about that particular phase in our next session.